Welcome to the Well-Seasoned Librarian Podcast. This is Dean Jones, the Well-Seasoned Librarian. This is Season 4, Episode 14. Today we're talking to Kirsten Schilling, the author of the Fragrant Kitchen Cookbook, Culinary Recipes from a Botanical Perfumer. She's the owner of Arabesque Aromas and also Arabesque Press. Arabesque Aromas is her perfume company, which she's had for quite a while and is very successful. Her book, Fragrant Kitchen Cookbook, is a wonderful book with a lot of really great recipes in it and a lot of information on cooking with herbs and spices in your cooking. So I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I had having it. She's a great guest and I really enjoyed talking to Kirsten. Hope she comes back on the show again. So without further ado, onward we are to the conversation. 1. Welcome to the Well-Seasoned Librarian Podcast. Today, I'm very honored to have on my podcast the writer Kirsten Ismene Schilling. Her book, The Fragrant Kitchen, Culinary Recipes from a Botanical Perfumer, has been out in 2014, and we want to talk about this today among other works. Kirsten, thank you for being on the program.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Now, can you tell our listeners who are unfamiliar with your work briefly about yourself?
Yes, I'm an art historian and a botanical perfumer, and I've always loved to write, and so it seemed only natural to combine my interests into a publication.
Now, you were born in Eastern Pennsylvania. How did you come to move to California?
That's right, I did, and I moved here when I was about 21 or 22 years old to be with my childhood sweetheart, who was also from the East Coast.
Must have been quite a culture change, especially with weather and such.
It was. I moved here directly from New York City, and I think it took me about 3 months to slow down my walk because it's just a very different pace in Los Angeles. And it was a very different way of interacting with people in Los Angeles too, versus New York City, where you're smushed up against people all the time in restaurants and subways. So yes, there was a lot to get used to, but I fell in love with California and I never left.
Now, you have a BA in art history from Loyola Marymount University, who I do a lot of work with. They're a wonderful place. I love their library. Tell us about your work in art and who your influences are.
Yes, I had an amazing time as an undergrad at Loyola Marymount. And I don't think it was until many years later that I realized how spoiled I was to have the opportunity to study there. I think that's where I really kind of started to thrive and fall in love with learning and education and developed a yearning for travel and came into my own creatively too. I pretty much focused on the creative lives of female artists in the modern era. And I'm so glad I did because I think it's influenced everything I've ever done since. Their voices influenced my creative nonfiction writing, and the way they live their lives kind of opened me up to new horizons, being from Pennsylvania on the East Coast. I think it left a very strong impression on me that's still with me today.
Now, you mentioned that you were following some female artists. Who influenced you? Who are some of the people whose work really stuck out for you?
I was very smitten with Leonore Feeney and her portraits, her self-portraits. And Leonora Carrington was another one. They were maybe two of my favorites. Beatrice Wood, who I did my graduating project on. And I was so lucky to live in Los Angeles at a time when Beatrice Wood was still living. And she agreed to an interview with me. And it was amazing to be able to drive out to Ojai with my little humble tape recorder and my questions and my little hand shaking with the paper, with my questions written on them. It was amazing to meet her. So she's always been a muse of mine, and she's passed over now, but a lovely gift I received after she passed away. My partner at the time, we're no longer together, but he bought me one of her bracelets from her estate. So I still have that and I cherish that and my time that I got to spend with her in her home.
I think that people, we often forget the importance of that, like having a conversation and talking to people we admire is such a treasure. We so rarely get to do it. And sometimes if we meet the people that we love, We choke up. I know I have many times. It must be quite, just wonderful to have that memory in your kind of your history, your mental history of your life.
I cherish the book that she signed for me. And she's another author and artist who is very autobiographical in nature. And that too has inspired me. My cookbook is autobiographical. My perfumes often come from personal experiences, things that I love. I love that personal voice. That's my favorite thing in both art history and in literature is one's personal true voice. And Beatrice Wood, I think, really represented that in her writing, in her art, and in the way she lived her life, which I would argue is part of her art. So yes, it was wonderful. And she paid me a compliment that day that I've always cherished. She took my hands and she showed them to her assistant and she said, "Doesn't she have the most creative hands?" And I mean, I don't know what creative hands are exactly, but I was an artist at the time. And I just always cherished that memory of her noticing, I guess she saw me, she saw something in me, and it felt so wonderful. I was young then, I think I was about 22 or 23. So it meant a lot.
I love that. Now, you're also, in addition to this, you're also an archivist and art historian. Can you tell us about your work in these fields?
Yes. Again, I think everything is kind of merged and conglomerated all together. But I've noticed I've graduated from LMU with a degree in art history. And I think that has always stayed with me. It's stayed with me just when I'm taking photographs, when I'm traveling. Museums are my food. They're my soul food. And even my business name, Arabesque Aromas, I got the name and the idea and the concept behind Arabesque Aromas while I was in a museum. I was visiting the V&A Museum in London, and I was in the Islamic Decorative Arts wing, and I was reading about what an arabesque is. And my art historian's brain kind of made a connection between the abstract botanical forms that make up arabesques and creating perfumes with botanical ingredients. And to me, I saw a similarity. And then right there on the spot in the museum, I came up with the name Arabesque Aromas. So I don't any longer work as an art historian. I did work in an art auction house for a while. And in cultivating my archival career, I've worked in some museums. I've worked with artifacts and such in different capacities. But I think from a day-to-day level, just the way I use my eye and my taste for beauty and my love of history, I think the art history education is always with me too.
Now I see, I am, the minute I started talking to you, I was immediately attracted to the distilling machine behind you. I was like, oh, this looks fun. So tell us about your work with fragrance, with perfume, and the distillation process. That is just amazing. I love that.
Yes, I've wanted this little still for a really long time. It's an Italian machine made by Italian makers of espresso machines, and they designed this little tabletop still called the Alemicus Gaggia, specifically for chefs who wanted to make small amounts of distillate, maybe for desserts and that sort of thing.
Oh, kind of like Aiden Farah's work in Spain, his work where he does all the scents and everything.
I don't know who that is, but I use it for edible purposes mainly. I can't make essential oils because the still is too small. I could if it was bigger. It holds only a small amount of plant material, so it makes about 2 ounces of floral water at a time that I do use to cook with or for beauty purposes, and that sort of thing.
So like orange water, like that kind of thing, or rose water?
Well, you need a lot more rose petals than I can obtain or fit into my little still because rose is such a precious and hard to create water. But I can create beautiful things. Like I've just moved from Sacramento to Los Angeles. I had a really nice sized distillation garden that I planted in Sacramento, but I didn't bring it with me. So I no longer have it. But one beautiful thing I made and have made over the years repeatedly is a lovely rose geranium water, which is really a very all-purpose herbal ingredient you can use to cook with. I use it on my skin. It has a lot of purposes. It's very calming. It smells amazing. So something like that. Like I use a lot of herbs in my machine since it is so small. It's a perfect size for a woman who has an apartment in LA.
Yeah, true. Now you were talking about, scents and stuff and wearing scents. Do you make perfumes for yourself?
I do. I make perfumes that I sell through Arabesque Aromas. And yes, I make my own perfumes, which is how most of this started.
What are
Yes.
some of your favorite scents that you like to wear yourself?
Yeah, probably the most controversial is patchouli. I find people either love or hate patchouli. And I've taken it upon myself over the years. I've been making perfumes and aromatics for about 20 years to try to reclaim patchouli's poor reputation. I think maybe a lot of people have been exposed to cheap versions of the oil, and I can understand. I mean, it is harsh. Some people say it smells like bug spray. But if you have a beautiful patchouli and you know what to do with it, I just think you can make some stunning things with it. And I know people associate it with the 70s, the 60s and 70s, but it was also a really common scent back in 100 years earlier in the Victorian times. And it's one of my favorites. I used to manage an essential oil company, and we would get beautiful dark and light patchouli from Indonesia. And
Wow.
yeah, it's really I think it's a lovely ingredient to work with.
I love patchouli, and there was a men's cologne in the 80s briefly called Savoy. And
Mhm.
it was a mixture of different scents, of course, but the ones that were the standouts were patchouli and tangerine.
Nice.
And it was I loved it. And then, of course, they immediately stopped. Every time I find scents I love, and then immediately they discontinue, I feel. So
Yeah,
uh,
I can understand. There's a real pain, I think, in the heart when that happens, when you're really
yeah.
attached to something and you can no longer, and I feel that too as a botanical creator or a botanical perfume creator. I actually just made a beautiful scent called Magnolia with this champaka that I loved. And I just ordered more, and the new batch smelled completely different. And so I can't recreate this perfume until I find, again, a champaka that's as nice as what I was using. So, I mean, I guess that's part of botanical perfumery, is that some of these things are ephemeral because
Yeah.
they're
They stay in the memory though forever. I mean, I remember scents, from decades ago. I mean, it's funny what you remember. Like there are memories that take you back, like Proust's Madeleines, that take you right back to childhood.
Mhm.
It's funny. I mean, even scents that aren't pleasant can have pleasant connotations or just take you back. Like for me, the mixture of Aquanet hairspray and
Oh,
cigarettes
oh
takes me
yeah,
back to my childhood like that.
that's a high school girls' locker room for me. Absolutely. I had a can of Aquanet in my locker, I'm going to say. But I grew up in the 80s. You had to have big hair,
Yep,
the
yep,
80s and 90s. So, a girl couldn't be without her
that's
Aquanet.
right. Now, can you tell us about some of the scents you sell from Arabesque Aromas?
Sure, yes. I'm just working on my midwinter collection, and I
Oh,
just today put out a scent that I put out every year around this time, celebrating the evergreen symbolism of the holidays, the holly, moss, and ivy. And it's a beautiful fougere. So it does have patchouli in it, and I also thought people might like it, especially this year. It's very calming. It has clary sage and lavender, so it's very relaxing, as well as green and kind of smooth. So I was wearing that yesterday, and I really liked it. Yeah,
that
I
sounds.
try to release my scents seasonally, and
Oh,
so
nice. I like
yes,
that.
yes, yeah. I should send you a sample so you can enjoy
I
it.
like that. Thank you. Yeah, I wear a lot of cedar myself, and my wife always says that when I go to work, I my smell lingers behind me, and she says she can always smell the cedar, and she associates it with me. Or my closet smells like wool and cedar, and always has that kind of effect. And it's nice that people can sometimes have kind of a scent that identifies them, or you can kind of like, oh, that reminds me of that person.
Agreed. And I love the smell of cedar. I like to work with cedar myself. It's really a lovely smell.
Now, you're a creative nonfiction writer. Can you tell us about some of your work and the idea of creative nonfiction?
Yeah, I would love to. Ever since I was a very little girl, I always wanted to be a writer. And I think I'd lean more towards the introvert side of things. I've always kept a journal, and I do love words. I love language. I love reading, but maybe even more, I love writing. And so I didn't have the confidence, I don't think, to write for anyone but myself for a really long time. And then when I went to college and I fell in love with art history is when I realized maybe I was actually pretty good at writing papers about my passions, but I kind of kept my creative writing to myself for a long time. I was kind of shy and afraid. And I think I got maybe 2 or 3 stories published around 2012, and that was a really big deal for me. I didn't really know what I was doing, I just kind of published them. Someone gave me a link to a magazine that was looking for women authors, and I submitted very shyly, not knowing what to expect, and they accepted me, which was great. And then, I guess maybe because it's challenging, I put it away for a while. And then I was in a really, really serious car accident.
Oh, so sorry.
Yeah, thank you. The ER doctor said, "Do you know how lucky you are to be alive?" And I always remember that. And since that year, which was 2018, I just have really tried more to do things I want to do. I'm grateful to be here. I'm grateful I have a second chance. I'm trying to live more authentically. And so one of the things I did when I was recovering was I published this collection of short stories that I had lying around forever. And they were inspired by journal entries of mine. So they come from my life. They are autobiographical, just the way I was saying. I love hearing the personal narratives of other people, whether it's through art or their writing. And so that's the style that I use when I write too. And I just summoned my courage and I published this first collection of mine. And I guess I had my confidence boosted a little because I sent it to some other publishers and they accepted several stories too. So that made me feel a little stronger. But it was a quiet launch. I didn't do a lot of publicity because I was still recovering. It was just something I wanted to do more for myself. So I did. And I enjoyed it. I enjoyed putting it out there. And I enjoyed designing the book too. And I was very careful about what font and the color of the cover. And I enjoyed all those little creative details too. And so I had a printer who was very patient in working with me. And I do have the book on my website available. And I think I have about 100 copies left. I just printed, it's like a fine press of just a limited, amount of copies. So.
Now I wanted to speak on this because I find that in my life, I know so many artists that are worried about pleasing others with their work, and writers and visual artists and actors even, and they're really worried about being popular or pleasing others. And I find in my life, though, I really love the artwork and the writing of people that don't give a fuck, that just want to write what they want to write.
Yeah.
And I think it's funny because we do gravitate ultimately to people that really do work that is for themselves. Like Patti Smith, she's my favorite artist. I love her writing, her books. I love her music, and she could care less what other people think. She really doesn't care. She does it because she wants to do it, and it's from her soul.
Yes.
And I think the fans love that because we're like, we should be like this as well. We all want to take that risk as well. And we don't have to be loved. We don't have to have people. We could write books for ourselves. It's okay to give ourselves permission to do that. And you did that. You gave yourself permission to say, I don't give a fuck. I'm going to write this. And if people read it, they read it. They don't, they don't.
I think there's something really grounding about being in that kind of accident that I was in, where suddenly so many things that were silly just no longer mattered, things like walking again and just something important I wanted to do because I was still alive. I just did it. And you're right. I think there's a real purity in that people pick up on. And agreed. Yeah.
I think America is plagued by the idea of taking things for granted. We have so much, and we are a country that right now is at a very fragile time. And I think we're still in that denial where we don't really realize how tenuous this all is.
I think that's true. And I think this pandemic has been very interesting, I think, for a lot of us to have, if we accepted the downtime that we were given. Some people maybe just tuned out, but I did it just to do a lot of thinking and reframing. And I did end up moving back to LA, which is something else that I've wanted to do. I was in Northern California for 10 years. I was away from Los Angeles and I missed it the entire time. And so it's something else I really wanted to do. And I just got here about 6 months ago, and it's just another thing. I'm trying to listen to my heart more and to just kind of live more in integrity, like those women I mentioned, 100 years ago, who were just so brave and lived so honestly. And I think that's important to do that. And so I'm trying my best.
Now, what are some of the favorite things about Los Angeles that you like?
Well, back to my love of museums. I left LA, I think, to go live in the country for a while. I was going through a divorce. I lost my job of 7 years running the essential oil company. This was around the time of the economic downturn. And I went and I needed to go live out in nature for a while, but I got bored in a way really quickly. As much as I love nature, and I mean, look what I do. I work with botanicals. I love gardens. I love my animals, but I need to be around museums. I need culture. I missed things like going to the opera, and I also missed the food culture. So I'm really glad to be back here for so many reasons. And I don't know. I needed that kind of stimulation. And I mean, I could still be creative out in the woods where I was living. I was up in Nevada County for a while, and then I was in Sacramento. I still was creative, but I just don't think it's the same thing. And the more I look back, I just see how much museums and being near museums and working with artifacts and all of that sort of thing, how much that inspires me. And so, and then I also thought it would feed my archival career to be back here. That it would give me some fresh opportunities. I wanted something fresh. And I also wanted to be in a new city, since the city I was living in, I associated with this car crash. But I wasn't really happy there anyway. So I think it was just time to go.
Yeah, no, and Los Angeles is so wonderful. I mean, there's so many great museums there. It's funny that two of my favorite artists and writers also were big proponents of museums and helped fund them. Vincent Price gave a lot to local museums. They even have a Vincent Price museum. And Steve Martin, who I adore and who's a really good writer as well as actor, he is a huge proponent of the arts in Los Angeles. And there's just so many. My brother goes down to Los Angeles a lot. My brother's an artist, and he just raves about the museums he gets to go to and talks. And I'm always envious. I always want to spend more time in Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of food do you like down there? There's so much food. It's just really a hotbed of the food culture and the food industry right now. And so many big name chefs live there. What foods do you like to eat down there?
It's not even anything that fancy. I just don't think I realized how fortunate I was to be surrounded by so many choices and opportunities.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Until I moved away. Yeah. And that was hard for me. It didn't occur to me. I was thinking about so many other things. I love Oaxacan food.
Yeah, me too.
I don't get tired of Oaxacan food. I love Ethiopian food. Currently, I could walk to Little Ethiopia, and that just makes me so happy.
Yeah.
The Mexican food here is fine. And that's just naming a few, So I'm just delighted to be here. And the idea of the choice, I think, is a huge factor for me.
Yeah. You don't really have that in Nevada County.
No. And I mean, Sacramento, I did have some places. I mean, I made it work, but it just wasn't quite like LA. I mean, I think when I got here, the first few weeks, I think every week I was ordering a different dish from my favorite Indian restaurants that I had remembered from years ago. And I just had to, I had to get that out of my system. I missed it so much. And Persian food, one of my favorite is here. So every time I would visit, I would kind of ask all my friends, could you meet me at my favorite Persian restaurant in Westwood? And they would. I would kind of get my fix, but it's just lovely to live here again. And also I think LA, I lived here for so long and I've had so many great things here. I feel safe here. Right. It feels like home to me. And so I wanted to be back here, and here I am. So I'm excited to be here.
So that's wonderful. I mean, Los Angeles is great. I always like visiting when I go there. I totally understand.
Mm-hmm.
The Fragrant Kitchen, Culinary Recipes from a Botanical Perfumer, that you published in 2014 and re-released in 2018. Tell us about that book a little bit. You published that under your own imprint, Arabesque Press. Can we talk about that?
Yeah, I would love to. I think that was a book that I was writing in my head for about 10 years before I put it to paper. And I wrote that in Nevada County when I was living out in Nevada County. And I had this, I had a very dear neighbor, Regina. See, now I'm tongue-tied.
It's infectious.
My neighbor, Regina, who also is very literary and also used to live in Los Angeles, and we hit it off. And we used to have tea together a lot. And she's the one who coined the phrase that this cookbook was like Kirsten world, because she knew Kirsten world well. I would have her over a lot and I'd, have some of these cookies I just made. And she knew my cooking, she knew my kitchen. And so she's the one who also called it an autobiographical cookbook, but I think she's right. It pretty much was my own take on cooking and the way I use raw materials, dry ingredients, spices, herbs, my garden. And I was actually making incense one day. I was making an aromatic incense and I ran out of the ingredient that I needed. And I realized that I had some in my spice cupboard and I went to get it. And for me, it kind of showed me, I had a moment of clarity where I realized that I cook a lot like the way I make perfumery, like I have a lot of things in common between the two, and how interesting that I'm borrowing from one cupboard to make something else. And I mean, I think almost in all of the ingredients in that incense were actually just edible, beautiful, pure ingredients. And so that purity and that simplicity between the way I cook and the way I make perfume kind of feed each other. And so that kind of helped me solidify the book and put it to paper.
Now, how did many cookbook writers have a process that they work with to develop recipes and like testing recipes? What was that like for you?
These are all my own recipes. They were all part of my life already. I didn't include anything new that I didn't know. And I talked about it in my little YouTube short about the cookbook. And I also wrote about it a little bit in the intro. But my close friends were a very big part of this cookbook. And so I had my friends testing the recipes too, or I would cook them and then I would have friends like Regina come over and help me eat everything and, kind of give it the thumbs up or no. And a very good friend, Brandy, would help. She probably did the most testing with me as far as increments, because I'm an intuitive maker. I mean, I use my senses a lot for both making perfumery and for cooking. And so I did have to rein myself in a little bit so I could get the increments correctly. And then I used a few recipes, I think, that were just like a part of my past that were a big deal to me, like my figgy pudding. But yeah, my friends just helped me out, but I didn't really seek anything out that was outside of what Regina calls Kirsten world. It kind of was a picture of how I was living at the time, as far as what was in my pantry, what I was using, how I was cooking and baking, what I was thinking about these ingredients. I was very influenced by the slow food movement. I have been for a long time. And again, like, I don't really think you can separate the artisanal making of something like botanical perfumes from an artisanal way of looking at food and the ingredients. Like, I don't really think they're that separate. To mention, when you asked me about the ham-handed spice approach, I was going to mention that I was going to mention how I felt about cooking with essential oils.
Okay, go ahead.
Which I'm not a proponent of cooking with essential oils. I know I published an entire cookbook, The Fragrant Kitchen. It goes chapter by chapter with all the different aromatics that one could use in cooking. And I do not have an essential oils chapter. And this is because it's not a sustainable way of cooking, and it's not necessary with all the other choices that we have at hand. And it's, I think, in keeping with your question about the ham-handedness of, these spices, these kind of dead little tins of, 5-year-old cinnamon that you get at the grocery store, that's
or
not
older.
Yeah, it's not a real aromatic, and nor is that almond extract you mentioned, but on the other end of the spectrum, there's a tremendous cost, an environmental cost in making essential oils. And these little kits that some certain corporations are selling, I won't mention any names. I mean, it's not necessary to use essential oils in your cooking. And I wouldn't call that a creative way to cook aromatically.
Yeah.
It feels like they're plundering kind of just to make money. But honestly, I have a lot of respect for plants and plant ingredients, and I've made it my business for over 20 years. I've known some, really big people. I've studied with some big names in the field. I've studied with Jeannie Rose, Suzanne Caddy, who wrote the very important hydrosols book. She's my mentor and a dear friend. I managed an essential oil company for 7 years. And quite honestly, I personally feel too humbled to take it upon myself to cook with too many oils. Like that, they're really serious ingredients, and you need to know what you're doing. These are very concentrated plant essences.
Yeah.
And not only it takes an environmental toll, but I mean, these are very strong plant medicines you're putting into your body. I mean, your organs are not meant to be processing plant ingredients in such large quantities either. And I also feel like it's a little careless of these corporations to be putting out these essential oil cooking kits, because people are not skilled and they don't know what they're doing. And I don't really think it's a great idea to ingest them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Either. So
nobody really said, I mean, I'm glad you said that, because nobody really says that. And I think people assume they could just use anything willy-nilly and it'll be okay.
Well, I think that goes back to what you were saying about how we're so not creative cooks here in the US, and we just kind of accept what people tell us and give us, and the crappy tin of cinnamon on the shelf, or here's a kit from a certain company that you're supposed to use to cook with. But no, not necessarily,
Yeah.
I don't know. I think if people just think about it, it's much better to just work with plants or floral waters or spices than essential oils, especially while we're really considering the environment these days and being sustainable. What does that mean? I mean, I just wanted to call attention to this. I might allow myself a few drops of lavender oil in a cookie batter. My madeleines, they're my specialty. Once a year, maybe.
Yeah.
That's as far as I go. And so I did want to point out that that's not a part of my cookbook for a reason.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. I'll definitely include that, because it is important. And I think people might get sick or ill or harm themselves playing with something like that, not knowing what they're doing.
And that's the risk. I mean, these kits, they're just slung around and use this for this and use this for this. But that's not how our bodies work. We don't all have the same system.
Yeah.
And, again, I feel very humble about my essential oils. I'm very careful with them. I've studied for years, and I still don't feel qualified to put them in my mouth, or to feed them to other people. So I would recommend caution and maybe a little more of a conscious approach in terms of cooking with essential oils.
I think we all find out, we try and do things that are new to us, and we have experiences that it may not be what we intended. Like I've tried to make beer and had it literally blow up in my face. And I've created essences or liqueurs of fruit and had them not, you try things and you think they're going to work out, and you end up with something different than you're expecting, or maybe inedible. And you're like, oh, this is more of a curiosity than an edible item.
That's very true. That's the risk from being creative, but you learn every time. I think you try something new,
I love going to cooking stores that have foods from around the world or foods from a specific culture, because I can often times discover new things and new smells and how they affect the food. I often get bored with the complacency. I read so many cookbooks and so many recipes, and I see vanilla, 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 and occasionally it'll be almond extract or, if you're lucky, rose flower water, orange essence. But it's always pretty much vanilla, 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 which is, I love vanilla. I cannot love vanilla, but like you get, I think, a little bored of the banality. Nobody really tries to do anything. Like nobody ever colors outside of the line. It's always, very pretty much conservative, I think. And when I go to other, stores that sell stuff from other cultures, I'm able to see stuff, even just like things that seem unusual. Like I remember getting some candy from Australia. It was musk sticks, and it smells very much of the almost like cologne.
Wow.
But it's a candy and it's loved in Australia. And it kind of threw me for a loop. And trying herbs, I think, from other cultures, like I'm now growing epazote for use for Mexican food. And I'm trying, growing coriander and things that I'm not normally used to using, but like using more in my cooking all the time. Do you think we kind of have a kind of a ham-handedness in America where we're very conservative and just use the same things all the time? We're very reluctant to change.
I do. I think we absolutely are. I think people maybe are a little afraid. For me, though, I'm much like you in this way. I love going to stores and trying new things and reading what they're about. And yes, and I also, I was really lucky to be able to be a botanical volunteer at the Huntington Botanical Gardens in Pasadena. And I got to see a lot of spices growing there. And so for me, I mean, I guess it made them feel more accessible to me. I could understand them. And then later, when I was working at the essential oil company, we imported some really beautiful spiced oils like clove and cinnamon and just beautiful things anise, a beautiful anise oil from Australia, things like that. So for me, I already had a comfort level with them, I think, before, using them in my work. For me, I think I have a comfort level with raw materials like this, but I think you're right. Not everybody does. And not everyone has that historian's curiosity that I have, or that curious nose or curious palate that you were talking about. But I think there's such a sensuous delight in doing those kind of explorations. And yeah, I don't know. I wish people would venture out a little more. It's so fun.
I had a student worker that worked for me, and we were talking about asafoetida, which is used in Indian cooking a lot, and also in incense. And she described cooking just basically sweating onions and adding asafoetida and just having it as part of the meal. And I tried it, and it was wonderful. And my son and I liked it. And I went and told her about it, and she was so surprised. She's like, usually Americans would never do that. They would just try something. And I'm like, well, why not? What's lost? If I didn't like it, what's the worst that could happen? But
and I think you just put your finger on where the creativity is in all of this is that experimentation, and that willingness to try. Like, what's the worst that can happen? It's just,
yeah.
I find that very exciting myself. I don't know.
What are some of your favorites in cooking that you like to use that I think would surprise people? Unusual things that not unusual to you, but things that people might be surprised by.
Gosh, I don't know. I'm gonna have to think about this.
Okay.
I think people were some of my neighbors maybe were a little shocked to see me going outside every day, just picking things from my herb garden to use. I don't know. I had another friend who didn't know how to make tea, like iced tea, herbal tea.
Oh, wow.
It's so simple. This is how you do it. She was just completely shocked. I think it's hard for me to even gauge what is normal and what is not, just because I just do my own thing, and just because of the education that I had working with the oils and then working in the gardens with some, seasoned herbologists who taught me things I didn't know. I mean, at one point I had fear too. And they taught me how to not be afraid of the bees when I was weeding and working there. I was afraid at first, I was younger, and they taught me how to just be still and to be comfortable in the environment. And now I love hearing the bees working. It's one of the most magical things. I mean, maybe sometimes we just need a teacher to show us how to do these things, but let's see, I'm still trying to think. I mean, my figgy pudding, I love to have a party every year, and I love to invite a bunch of friends. I mean, clearly the pandemic has, changed this, but I love to show people figgy pudding. And it has medieval origins. Puddings were, that's like a medieval food in Britain.
Oh, yeah.
And I just love to make it from scratch, and I love to share what I'm doing. Most people haven't even heard of figgy pudding here, not here. My friends.
I have. I'm familiar with it.
Yeah.
And I think if I was there, I would always say, bring us the figgy pudding. Bring us the figgy pudding.
Absolutely. That's a big part of my holiday. I'm trying to think of what else. I haven't been such an active cook, honestly, since my car accident. I haven't had the extra energy for anything exotic so much. So it's been a little while. I keep about 5 spices on my oven, and I love to make like a really lovely chicken, whether it's like a lavender salt chicken.
Ooh.
Or just a Moroccan spice chicken.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful.
Yeah, and it's comforting, and it's not too hard with like baked yams or something like that. One of my favorite vegetables, I think people might find a little strange, is it's more European, I think, than it's American. Celery root.
Oh yeah. I love celery root.
I'm not such I'm not so fond of celery itself, but the root I absolutely adore with mashed with potatoes and some nice sea salt and butter.
It's so
Um,
good, and I think people are put off by its look before they peel it. They're looking at it going, "What the hell is this?" It looks
True.
not an attractive looking thing,
Oh,
but once you peel it, it's fine.
agreed. Not too different than a potato, but yes, it's very ugly and a little hairy, but
Yeah.
it's very good.
No, I love to julienne it and do like a little like a mayonnaise dressing on it. Serve it with
Mhm,
like pork and fowl and stuff like that. It's a favorite of mine.
mhm.
And mash, like you said, is so delicious.
Yeah, I love fennel too. I like to cook with fennel.
Oh, fennel's amazing and so wild all over California. It's everywhere.
It's true. I remember when I was in Nevada County, I was with my friends and I just stopped, and my nose, I smelled fennel and my friends just thought I was crazy. We were in a parking lot that kind of crested and then there was like a hill going down and I just insisted and I wouldn't drop it. And they were like, come on, crazy lady smelling weird things. But I insisted and I finally looked down the hillside covered in wild fennel. I was so happy that I could trust my nose in that way. And I had no idea that it was growing wild. And so that was a really neat moment for me. I
It's
never
such
hardly
it's so underused in America. We don't really cook with it much, but we have it everywhere. It's crazy.
it's a shame too, because it's very good for your digestion. For me, like it makes me feel very good when I eat it. I like it. And the same goes with some herbs. Like I lived on this little farm where I mentioned my friend Regina out in Penn Valley. And that farm was covered in Melissa, lemon balm.
Yeah.
It's like a lovely herb you could use, but I don't think I think I was the only one who really did anything with it. I made iced tea and such with it, but I don't think people know what these things are that are growing.
But we're really embarrassed by we have an embarrassment of foods growing around California. And I know that the Native Americans who lived here were hunter-gatherers that only spent 20 hours of their week gathering food. And they
Wow.
didn't have to because food was so abundant here. Even in times when I've had scarcity, I've been able to forage in the Napa Valley and
Mhm.
there was food all around me. I mean, I could live off blackberries there pretty much year round if I had to.
I loved living in the Napa Valley. Sonoma was a very special place for me to live. I think that was my favorite place to live in Northern California. I got to spend a year there, and that's where I bought my treasured Meyer lemon and my fig tree.
Oh,
And I've
nice.
lived them for many years. They actually got so big that when I moved to LA, I had to leave them behind with friends. My fig tree was larger than me at that point. It was hard to leave it, but I also felt like, well, I did a good job. I took care of it and I will love it and pass it on, instead of traumatize it by a 6-hour car drive.
Yeah.
And that was a really verdant, wonderful place to be. I loved the Napa Valley. I loved all my time in the vineyards. I had a friend who worked at one of the oldest vineyards, the German vineyard. Oh gosh, I'm not going to think of the name now. Gunlock Bunshu.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I loved visiting that place. Yeah, there's something very special about the Napa Valley.
No, it's beautiful. Unfortunately, they've been so affected by the fires, but they're bouncing back and they're really doing well. I'm really impressed by the people out there. Well, I want to ask now, what's next for you? What is the next project you're working on?
I think so many of us are asking what's next with this pandemic. And for me, I'm putting together pieces since this car accident. I think what's next for me is finishing my degree in archives. I have an internship lined up, hopefully, pandemic permitting. Um, I should have an internship lined up working with rare books, learning how to
Nice.
catalog rare books. And I would really love to have that experience under my belt, so to speak. And I'm looking for some work in my field. And then aromatically, I'm hoping to continue my YouTube short films. I like to tell stories about my perfumes and my creative process and why botanical perfume ingredients, or I'm sorry, why botanical ingredients for perfumes. So I'm wanting to continue that this year. I haven't written a word since the pandemic began. I don't know if it's just too stressful or what, but I'm halfway through a collection of short stories. My second collection I'd like to finish. Um, and I think that's all I can see right now. I don't have, that's as far as I've gone so far.
No, the pandemic has made it hard for a lot of us to kind of make plans because you feel like you're writing it in sand.
So true. So true.
Well, Kirsten, thank you. I want to tell you I really appreciate you being on the podcast. I hope to get to have you on here again. You're a great guest.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me. It was my pleasure.
Thank you. That was author Kirsten Schilling of the Fragrant Kitchen Cookbook. She also has a perfume company, Arabesque Aromas, and her own publishing house, Arabesque Press. I had a great time talking with her. Now on Friday, we're going to be having author Julia Helena Hadas on with her book, Witchcraft Cocktails. I'm looking forward to that. That was a great conversation as well. In the following week, we'll be having multiple authors coming back who are on here previously for our winter solstice author panel. We'll be advertising more about that next week. So until then, have a great week and see you on Friday and keep cooking.